Hello, and welcome to the Fluid Voice. I am Ozma in the Dark, still rocking she, they pronouns. I am here, as always, by Perfict. How are you doing, Perfict?
I'm doing fine. He, him pronouns.
And tonight we have a guest, Melody, who runs the A World to Win channel. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Hi, everyone. I'm Melody, or Mel. I use she, her pronouns, and I run a Marxist educational YouTube channel called World to Win.
Yeah, and tonight we are going to talk about the liberal agenda. So,
dun, dun, dun.
dun, dun, dun. So I guess I'll start first with my egotism. No, my general thoughts about this is just, actually, I don't know what to think about this in terms of the ways it's implemented. I think my brain might have turned off for a bit. So if either of you have any initial thoughts, that would be wonderful.
I'm not sure there is such a thing. It gets crazy. It's defined by its opponents. I think that the liberal agenda is so fractured and spread into little groups that bicker with each other that there isn't really a unified front. And that's part of its problem.
As you said, I think you said it's defined by its opponents, and I think that's an interesting way to put it, which is to say that I think liberalism, I think we need to be very precise with our terminology. Because I think liberalism with a capital L has a very specific geographical, historical connotation in the context of like the contemporary United States. Which seems to mean, very generally speaking, anyone who has political positions that are an inch to the left of Ronald Reagan, which is to say it's a very broad political signifier. If all you listen to is Tucker Carlson, then Hillary Clinton is a liberal and a communist, and that's not a contradiction in terms at all for them. Despite the fact that as folks of the left, we know that liberalism and communism are very different things, but in the realm of kind of media discourse and propaganda, particularly for the American right wing. Liberal, anarchist, communist, socialist are all the same word, just with a different label on it.
Yeah, and that is one of the weirder things about when you use language, because to some degree it is important to know who you're talking about and what version of terms they're using, because you have plenty of people on the right who would just be like, Democrats are liberal. Well, I mean, you can make that argument for other reasons, but
they constantly say it. They say Democrat equals liberal equals communist equals socialist equals anti-anarchist super soldier, whatever. They're constantly
which equals
making those
fascist somehow.
Right,
yes.
right.
Yes,
there's so much propaganda, embroiled with the whole, discourse that they've shaped, that it's a little, frankly, its incoherence is a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. So just to be clear, because we're all at least a tad left of center, some further left than others, but just to be clear, I think it'd be good to define what we might mean on the left by liberal.
Sure. Well, generally speaking, liberalism, and I just finished reading a whole book about the topic, so I better come correct on it, which is liberalism is with a lowercase l, you might say, is a very broad political tradition that goes back to mostly, although not exclusively, British and French thinkers such as Alexis de Tocqueville, John Locke, and Sayus. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but generally speaking, again, very broad strokes here.
Yeah.
The philosophy is a political philosophy that has as its primary concerns individual liberty and property rights, private property rights, that is. And it emerges kind of at the same time as the advent of what we now kind of think of as early contemporary capitalism.
Yeah, because contemporary capitalism started. I mean, that did start around the same time as the American Revolution. A lot of these things happened pretty close to the same time, the turn of the 19th century or whatever.
Sure. And I mean, economic historians, and this is like very much my wheelhouse, economic historians sometimes, split hairs over whether, okay, is the 16th century, with colonialism and kind of the beginnings of what we might call merchant capitalism, is that where we draw the line? Is it, later in the 17th, 18th century with the development of proper, like, the Industrial Revolution, that we really call that the starting point of modern capitalism? That's up for some matter of debate.
Yeah.
But broadly speaking, sometime in the last 300 to 500 years, let's say, that's a pretty broad marker.
Yeah, and I was going to say the other philosopher I think of when it comes to a lot of those ideas, because they did weave their way into a lot of the basic constitutional rights in America. Voltaire was another influence that, if I'm well, hopefully I'm correct about
that's
it.
fair to say. Also, more so-called moral philosophy, like Adam Smith, author of The Wealth of Nations. Benjamin
John
Franklin.
Locke.
John
Locke.
John Stuart Mill, David Ricardo. A lot of these, 17th, 18th century political and economic thinkers. Yeah.
Yeah, although, what was the thing that was replaced? Because with a lot of American stuff, private property got, even if it was culturally more ingrained, a lot of the early leaders replaced private property with another similar value. Maybe it was the because there's freedom of speech, freedom of, wow, my brain, I should know the Constitution.
Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. There's a whole litany.
Freedom from search and seizure.
I was thinking of the
those are pretty specific.
Three or whatever.
Right. So I mean, we can get into specifics, but broadly speaking, we're talking about negative liberties, freedoms from things, freedom from, supposed, government tyranny, right? Freedom from, restriction of movement, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, freedom of commerce, etc. But what we need to understand is that the concept of private property is really central here, not simply because it's like co-constitutive with capitalism, but also because of what we now understand to be that we broadly speak of as the racial system, right? Because private property at this time very much includes Black people, right? Because slavery is an absolute central component of the global economy at this point. So the concept of private property is not this abstract kind of, I think that's one thing that we really need to get away from is conceiving these things as transhistorical abstract categories that we can just fill with whatever we want, right? These are concepts that are very, that emerge together with, economic developments and, the various exigencies of the development of early capitalism in America. And I think that, not just in America, of course, but it's absolutely inextricable from the global slave trade. And the concept of private property can't be disentangled from that. And of course, of the forcible expropriation of land from indigenous peoples in the Americas and around the world.
Yeah,
so private property is very much bound up with those geopolitical developments, and the development of, by extension, the development of this philosophy of liberalism.
So what counts as private property in this? Like, for instance, I own a computer. Is that, I mean, because oftentimes I feel like a lot of your descriptions have related to land and dwellings.
Yeah, well, so let's be very specific. My pocket watch, my cell phone, my laptop computer, those are my effects, my personal property. That is not the same as private property. Because when we say private property, especially when we're reading historical documents and talking about these kind of historical concepts, private property refers almost exclusively to land, capital, like, big factories, machines, offices, etc., and things that could not be reasonably used by a single individual or even a small group of people. So your TV is your personal property. Your bookshelf with all the books on it are your personal property. And so those are categorically distinct from private property as it's generally referred to in historical literature.
Yeah, and this actually comes to general concern I have with whenever you talk about the subjects. I mean, because a lot of times people knee-jerk against anything that doesn't knee-jerk against something that sounds different, and then they think, oh, they just listen to the property part, I get the impression.
Right. And
honestly, like, if you don't know that about private property, it's easy to think, oh, this is property in my home, and therefore it's private property because it's not public property.
Right. I think that's a different kind of categorical distinction that exists within, like, common everyday language, which is fine. Like, that's okay. But I think that when we're unpacking these things that are foundational to contemporary political philosophy, that we need to unpack them on the terms that they were. Excuse me, my voice is getting a little cracked, but we need to unpack them on the terms that they were understood on in their time and place, and that, at least when we're in the context of talking about things like property categories, like, those are things that we need to be very explicit about when we're having these discussions, and we need to lay out our terms very concretely from the outset.
Yeah.
And so, and on the other hand, I also want to kind of develop some thoughts here about why people conflate those categories of, you know, personal and private property. I think it's actually very deliberate. I think that you know, because this very specific category of private property has this historical weight to it, that extending it into the realm of, you know, oh, my TV and my Xbox and my, you know, my bookshelves and so on, those are my property, so it's just an extension of the same concept. But I think that leads to pretty obvious confusions that you just indicated. So I think that part of my, at least what I feel like part of my duty as a political educator, is to repeatedly unpack those problems and help folks understand the difference between personal and private property and why that those are you know, categorically distinct, not only kind of in language and not only in our understanding of things, but also in historical context as well.
Yeah, and well, I mean, not to get too off topic, but in terms of making any social change, teaching people is important, so people know what has happened and what they can do, changing minds. There's like several factors that are important for making any sort of significant change. Oftentimes a lot is fought back against, but that's its own other story. So I guess why exactly is it, what makes private property so important outside of just it getting taught over and over that it's important?
Right. So the very concept of freedom as conceived of by liberalism, right? The word for example, like, let's begin with what is liberalism. Liberalism is thinking about liberty, freedom, right? That's the central focus of it as a ideology.
And freedom sounds good.
Yes, right, exactly. If you want an ideology to resonate with people, it has to have some central appeal. Whether or not that ideology can actually deliver on its promises is another matter. But if you want to promulgate your ideology, you have to have something that people can sink their teeth into, and a concept like freedom is broad enough, and you know, it can kind of be filled in by,
and people don't want to be owned by others.
Right. So this is why, paradoxically, for example, you know, the French Revolution with its you know, liberté, égalité, fraternité are lauded, but as soon as the Haitian Revolution happens, not too long after that, with the same kind of underlying philosophy, you know, like very literally being acted out, with, you know, slaves literally killing their masters and taking over.
Yeah.
Right. The reaction from erstwhile so-called liberals was not applause, but horror. They were terrified that, you know, black people were suddenly taking destiny into their own hands and making an effort for self-government, right? This is not what they had in mind with this idea of liberalism. The idea of liberalism is freedom for human beings, which in their minds were unequivocally white people and not black people.
Well,
black people
they would have to see black people as people.
That's right. And that's why, again, I stress in my explanation here that this concept of private property and cannot be meaningfully extracted from the concept of liberty in this regard, because who is the liberty for? The liberty for in the context is liberty for the correct people, right? In this case, the white people. This is that their freedom to have property is their freedom to have black slaves and extract their labor and reap the fruits of it. And this becomes even more kind of relevant during the Civil War, because this is exactly the kind of, the discourse of so-called states' rights, right? It's the states' rights to do what exactly?
That in itself is that's a whole propaganda campaign that was added afterwards, because the Civil War was about wanting to keep black slaves.
Yes, absolutely. Right, but I'll stress again that, and this is what I learned from reading this book that I just finished, which is Liberalism, A Counter-History by Domenico Loserbo, which is that the Southern states, the Confederates, framed their struggle in terms of liberty, in terms of, we're going to rebel against the evil tyranny of Washington, which wants to take away our slaves.
Yeah, and I think almost... I mean, I obviously, when it comes to just about any sort of propaganda, whether you're using it in the broad version or the more colloquial version, because those are two different ways the word propaganda has been used, because the general colloquial version of propaganda is obviously always negative, and it's not inherently
They usually, when
necessarily
people say propaganda, they mean disinformation.
Yeah,
which is not strictly the case. But you're going to have to excuse me for just a moment.
Okay.
Okay. I'm here. So.
Yeah, you are here. And so what exactly are your... I mean, I guess I'll just get to the point where I was
I think that the Civil War was definitely about slavery. But I think that it was sold on something else.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, an interesting point. I think that's a relevant point. Is that what it was sold to a lot of the people in the South on was not allowing the North to dictate what our lifestyle will be, and that kind of thing. It was sold on an idea of principle and freedom and all that sort of thing.
Well,
there are instances where it's being sold, where something is being sold as something. And you go, that something is bad. If they had been selling it as a promotion of slavery, you'd go, well, anybody who's raising their hand behind that has got a serious problem. But they weren't. They were selling it as something else. And so there is sometimes some point to be made, which makes that a dangerous thing, because at least I feel I have to accede that, yes, there are some times where that's a relevant point. This isn't one. It's something I have to argue back. You understand? This isn't one of those times. You're making it, it's not relevant that it was sold to the people on a basis that was other than that,
Well, the thing about it, I mean, everything is sold in such a way that it
Hitler was selling his plan
surface
as Christianity.
Well, not just Christianity, but also to try to...
So when you say he wasn't Christian, and that it wasn't a Christian idea and so on, and that it wasn't a Christian ideal and all those sorts of things, you go, yes, but he was selling it as Christianity. And it was Christians who were buying it as Christianity.
Yeah.
So that's broader program is German nationalism. Is less integral to the program, and it kind of evades the kind of broader historical issue, which was not primarily along a religious axis, although, of course, the central scapegoat were Jews and other national minorities within the German country. But nonetheless.
I mean, I don't want to get off onto a discussion of Hitler. I was using it as a parallel for that in the South, a lot of what they were selling, they sold it to the populace, okay, as freedom and freedom from tyranny and all kinds of things. They weren't selling it as being about slavery.
But but we should note that there's also, it's not simply about propaganda. There's really, therefore, not just the South, but for the American settler project in general, there was concrete buy-in for white immigrants, German, English, etc., even Irish, or we can unpack the idea that non-Anglo-Saxons weren't even technically considered white, but they were not black, and that was the distinction. And they, so they had, it was not simply a matter of propaganda. There was real material buy-in for this idea of liberty, right? I think we have to consider this from more angles than simply, what people believe, right? Because people's beliefs stem from, in part, of course, I don't want to make a reductive equation here, but people's beliefs are, they stem from their material motivations, right? There are plenty of people who believe things that are not strictly in line with their material motivations, of course, but there is an underlying, the underlying psychology has things within, the real world which reinforce its apparent validity, right? That's all I'll say about that.
Well, and that also relates to the fact that people don't often think about the end goal, partially because people are already have a lot to think about in terms of trying to survive, but it's just a way people can get exploited, and also I keep remembering the negative aspect of Abraham Lincoln, which is that he wanted to free black people, and by free them, ship them to different country because it would be better for America to be white.
Wanted to buy French Guiana for them.
Yep.
Right. No, yeah, we should. There's no such thing as a good U.S. president here. Abe Lincoln's decision to sign the Emancipation Proclamation was a very cynical move in terms of what it aimed to do. It was not out of principle, out of, oh, yes, I'm an abolitionist, I'm going to help free the slaves. It was, this is going to damage my political opponents. This is going to, cause major problems for the Confederates, so I'm going to, rub sand in the wound.
Abolition was part of the liberal agenda.
I'll push back on that. Abolition was not uniformly something that liberals embraced.
I will grant all of that. You never get something that all the liberals embrace, or that's really
sure. But I want to. What the thing that I'm really wanting to emphasize is that abolitionism doesn't come from the liberal tradition. It certainly. There's some confluence, there's some overlap, and I won't deny that. However, I think that, we have to, the point to put on it is that abolitionism came out of, largely out of the autonomous movement of black people themselves to emancipate themselves from slavery. And this was, certainly you could say that it was influenced by, some ideas from liberalism, but many liberals themselves were not abolitionists and were firm believers in slavery and often had material interests tied up in the slave trade themselves, such as John Locke. John Locke had financial interests that were directly tied up in the international slave trade.
Yeah, a lot of rich people did. This gets me thinking, and partially because I'm also interested in neoliberalism. What is there a distinction between neoliberalism and liberalism?
Yeah, so that neoliberalism, I think, is a word that has a lot of kind of mystification surrounding it. So the liberalism part we've kind of established. We've established that it's a ideology that centers certain ideas about freedom and private property rights as central to it, and that it kind of emerges in the same historical moment that capitalism does. Neoliberalism, neo meaning new, emerges. Let's demarcate it very broadly speaking as an intellectual current that starts developing in the late 60s and throughout the 70s, and becomes kind of the ruling principle starting, let's say, with the Carter administration. So the late 70s is when neoliberalism becomes, whatever you want to call it, hegemonic. It becomes the ruling way of doing things. So neoliberalism is opposed to its most immediate historical neighbor in terms of its both development as an ideology and as a political program, which is to say it's not just about ideas, it's about policy, right? So in the post-war years, the United States had pretty, by its own standards, pretty robust social safety nets, and relative to what was to come, a pretty generous government spending on social provisions, and education and so on.
Highly rich people were taxed a lot of money, and you could work a part-time job and go to school.
Right. There's kind of the peak of the American dream, at least for certain sections of the predominantly white proletariat.
If you're
much
white.
more manifest. Yes, of course. I mean, and things are, so we should not have too many rose-colored glasses about this era. However, there's certainly a period for which things for in terms of policy, that the tax rate on the very wealthy was significantly higher, so tax rate on corporations was higher, and there was more provisional, social spending. So starting in the throughout the 60s, there's kind of this intellectual return to what we were talking about, liberalism. This is kind of an attempt to reconstitute liberalism, to make it new again, to give it kind of new life, and it becomes kind of the new reigning ideas within the economic sphere. So, for example, moving away from high tax rates for the very wealthy and towards low tax rates for the wealthy, low tax rates for corporations, and cutbacks to social provisions, social security, food stamps, that kind of thing. This emerges in the late 70s, and the first people who we'd probably call neoliberals are kind of economic advisors in the Carter administration. And then this really becomes like the program, you might say, in the 80s with the Reagan administration. And pretty much every president and every Congress since the early 80s in the United States has been what we would call neoliberal. it's this, again, it's rooted in this liberal philosophy that's focused on private property rights, on this kind of broad idea that, well, the government should just stay out of, again, I want to stress it's the idea that the government should stay out of the market and let capitalism work its wise magic, right? In practice, however, it's amounted to things like, which we know to be very, very much interfering with the private affairs of capitalism, such as bank bailouts and corporate gold parachutes for failing, so-called too big to fail corporations. And right, this wasn't just in 2007. This was back, all throughout this neoliberal period, which is still, broadly speaking, kind of what's the reigning program is now. I would definitely call Biden a neoliberal president.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, if anyone calls Biden not a neoliberal president, they haven't been paying attention, because, yes, he has done a lot to give in to popular demand with regards to social change, and by that I mean
on paper anyway.
Well, yeah, but like getting rid of the anti-trans stuff is.
It has been related to policy. He's been making policy changes.
Yeah, but at the same time, he still calls for bombings of certain places to create a strong America. He's still
declaring support for Guaido in Venezuela and the coup government in Bolivia and so on. Right. So
well, yeah, no, I was gonna say he lightly pushed back against the ICE, and the ICE the ICE, and the ICE said no. And then he hasn't really pushed back against them again, and is fine with children still being in cages.
Right. No, now they're called
they're social distance cages.
Yes, they're deluxe containment facilities for minors. Right. No, it's taking the same fascistic crap that we had under Trump and putting a friendly gloss to it, and maybe making some minor policy changes that, in my opinion, are incredibly superficial. They don't matter. Full disclosure, I did not vote for Biden. I don't vote Democrat.
Well, I did, but that's mostly because I don't think I'm always concerned about on principle. I'm always concerned about the way in which things go about. I mean, for one, Trump was slowly moving towards I think putting disabled people, finding ways to add disabled people and trans people to the camps. I think Trump was because of several policies that Trump was continuing, and I just think
my argument is that we haven't moved away from that in any meaningful way. Those policies were Obama-era policies that continued and escalated under Trump, and they're going to continue to escalate and expand under Biden. That's, in my opinion, I mean, again, this is my opinion.
Yeah, because
there's been materially very little change.
Yeah, because whatever. I get, so like Biden obviously revoked some of the changes, and I don't think Biden is going to. Basically, Biden needs to be fought against. I just think it's easier to. I think it's personally think it's easier to force Biden's hand than to force Trump's hand, and I'm always concerned when it comes to unless people are educated enough and on board with anti-fascist government, I'm concerned about any violent revolution just leading to towards fascism, or to a lesser extent more of the same. But that might be my general thinking. I
say here, I think the Biden and more broadly speaking, the Democrats have to. I think you're right in a sense that the stakes change in a way, because the Democrats have to at least pretend that they give a shit about these issues, even if they really don't. It's really just about political expediency. Whereas the Republicans are, very openly declare their intentions. I think, however, the kind of the other side of that coin for me, and this is why I don't vote Democrat, and why I'm actually very vocally anti-Democrat, is that is exactly the problem. That they, superficially, they maybe change a little thing here and there, but what their goal is to be a safety release valve so that people stop coming out into the streets and breaking windows and protesting, and they go to the ballot box and they check the box for Democrat and go back to sleep. That is what is really pernicious about the Democratic Party to me. Their whole political goal in terms of what they are as a functional structure within the American state is to co-opt and diffuse those kind of social concerns, right? They can kind of nod and say and slap a Black Lives Matter sticker on their campaign, and put the rainbow flag on the drones that they're gonna bomb Syria with. But materially, what their function is to diffuse that tension, and we saw this under the Obama administration. And I think that we're going to see it. We're seeing it already. We've had a lot of this kind of you can call it public rage is being misdirected into electoral channels, into this kind of harmless whatever you want to call it, safety release valve.
Yeah, because there does need to be continued. There needs to be continued fighting to make actual change to force people's hands, and it's it's the thing of the balancing act, because obviously I've heard arguments against anything that could be accelerationism, but yeah, I do think things still need to. There still needs to be revolts. There needs to be a threat, whether it be damaged property or whatnot, a threat that they should have to try to prevent. Because right now, people in Minneapolis are pissed that nothing has happened.
Right, and I mean, not too long ago, Minneapolis was being, for all intents and purposes, burned to the proverbial ground.
Well,
and justifiably so. Parts of the precincts, right?
I mean, mostly
a little
police stuff, and there was still
No. I'm being a little colorful.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm used to the fucking Republican propaganda. It's just it was completely burned to the ground. But to be fair, I live in quote unquote communist Minnesota, or whatever the fuck they call it. And we are not. We're barely a blue state. And
so you live in the center of the smoking hellscape?
Well, I live in an anarchist jurisdiction. I live in Portland, Oregon. So.
Oh, nice.
There's just. It's just.
That's lawless land.
Yeah, there's no laws here. The police are all have all been barbecued and they're slow roasting over open fires as we speak. There's just law and order is no, I'm kidding. Yeah. In fact, the mayor of Portland might be a perfect example of the kind of Democrat that I'm talking about. He talks about, green energy and social justice and all these very nice sounding things, but, who keeps sending the cops descending, down on us? It's him. It's literally him. He's also the police commissioner, because that's how the system works here. The mayor is also the police commissioner. And, there's been very public outrage about the Portland police's treatment of course, of our Black and Brown communities here, but also of their treatment of protesters, and not just their treatment of protesters, but I mean, there were several nights where they used tear gas in residential neighborhoods, and people complained because, who aren't even part of the protest, people complained because like police were shooting tear gas canisters into their houses.
Oh,
and this
God.
this is a Democrat. Again, this is a Democrat, and this is kind of what what I try to get at with this whole argument about so-called harm reduction, or I call it liberal anti-fascism. Well, this is not meaningfully distinct from if a Republican did it. We'd be talking about the same issues. It's I say fascism in the United States is a bipartisan phenomenon. The expansion of the police state has been a systematically bipartisan agenda.
Yeah.
And I would highly recommend, there's two books that I want to recommend for folks who want to start getting into this history. One of them is very pertinent for the current moment because the guy is in office. It's called Yesterday's Man by Branko Marcetic. It's a political biography of Joe Biden, and it really puts into perspective kind of his political career catering to upper middle class white grievance culture. And like the hand that he played in for example, the 1994 crime bill, which put, millions of, or, hundreds of thousands of Black and brown folks behind bars. There's the hand that he played in the promotion of the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and just his, anyway, I want to try to summarize the book. The other book is one that's very central to my critique of the American political system, which is called The Democrats, A Critical History by Lance Selfa. Highly recommend getting the 2012 edition. That's the latest edition, unfortunately, but it is a little bit more updated. If you can get your hands on that, it's from Haymarket Books. Highly recommend reading that book. Kind of goes into how the Democrats have developed historically as an institution over the history of the United States from its inception.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, it wasn't. Oh, I can't remember the day. Obviously, tear gas has been fired in a residential area in Minnesota, but I don't know how recent anyone tear gassed the inside of a home here. I just know I was walking to grab some food from the store, and I passed by some friendly anti-fascist protesters protesting for Black Lives Matter, and because those protests are still going on, but I passed them and they were going down a street. I forgot which street exactly, but naturally police showed up and started shooting tear gas, and in a general residential area. I was lucky to not feel the effects of it because I had moved forward enough, but police are problematic. St. Paul and Minneapolis police, but especially Minneapolis police, because they've been worse for a long time, but also St. Paul police are still bad because those were St. Paul police and they shouldn't have shot tear gas in a residential neighborhood, near a sidewalk.
More to the point, they shouldn't even have tear gas to begin with.
That's true too, because that's chemical warfare, and I think
it's
that's
literally it violates the Geneva Convention.
Yeah,
like
that's what I was going to get to.
Every time the police use tear gas, they're committing a war crime.
Yeah.
I'm never going to stop talking about books because that's kind of my jam. Another book that I want folks to check out, it's another one from Haymarket Press, which is Policing a Class Society by Sidney Herring, which gets into the development of mostly during the early 19th century, but it kind of covers the whole 19th century, of urban police forces, mostly in the north of the northern United States.
Yeah.
Which is, again, kind of institutionally distinct, but related to the development of like the slave patrols, which in the South, which kind of later became, the early policing institutions in the South. But this is more a story about how urban police forces developed to help manage the rowdy, developing industrial proletariat in the northern cities, which were, again, multi-ethnic, Poles, Germans, Italians, Hungarians, etc., and largely segregated ethnically as well. And the police, as they developed, one thing that a lot of folks don't understand the whole magnitude of is that policing, as we have it today, is a very modern institution. It did not exist, longer than 200 years ago. The police, as we know them, really developed in the early 19th century, in industrializing cities.
From
being, very relatively marginal. Maybe the city has like a night watchman or something to make sure people aren't getting into fights or whatever, to having full expansive forces that have hundreds or maybe even over 1,000 militarized officers that are regimented in a military style fashion. They frequently draw from ex-military people who view the domestic population as a foreign force to be managed and subjugated, rather than the ostensibly, right? You have protect and serve, right, is the mantra of the modern police.
Yeah, which they have never followed.
I promise you that is not and has never been how police see themselves.
But I was gonna say, obviously police are not really, so what we need, because nobody can stop a murder with bullets. Police officers randomly going around are probably incapable of stopping a murder with bullets. The only real use is a small section of police, which is the homicide detectives, and just about everything else needs to be moved to social work, because you'd have less autistic people getting shot to death. You'd have less black children playing with a toy truck being shot to death. You'd have less black children being shot to death accidentally because they shot into a car and caused collateral damage.
Or just frankly because a cop woke up and decided, I want to shoot a black kid today, because more often than not, that's frequently what happens.
Yeah, and that is something that needs to not, that you can't just be like, oh, you know what? I'll defund the police. Cricket.
Right.
Nothing happens.
And this is why, defund. Here's the thing: is that for folks really tuned in on the ground to the demands of the movement, defund is the compromise. Defund sounds radical by the standards of mainstream political discourse, but defund is the compromise. The demand is abolish. Because this is not something that can be reformed. This is not an institution that was ever created for a good reason other than to brutalize, minorities, brutalize Black people, brutalize brown people, and crush working class resistance. It's always been a fascistic institution, and it must be removed. It cannot continue.
Yeah, and
just to touch on one more thing, is you mentioned homicides, but and again, solving a homicide, these solve rates in these departments is negligible. Right? And on these cases that are handled by police, very few of them actually get solved.
Well, one of the things I've heard somebody speak on, which I thought was, we may be straying here, but I thought was interesting, was that policing is one activity. And it's related to crime, and so on. But they are not, it's not the same thing. And they can be different departments. You can have a crime investigation department and a policing department, which polices the populace and polices the crimes.
But I mean,
and that's what they do.
Does the populace need to be policed? What do they need to be policed for?
Right. That's what I was really getting to. That's the heart of the issue. Why are and again, this is why this book is something that I constantly recommend, which is that we really have to consider what is the social function of the police to begin with. And people, I think, are really on the wrong track when they're talking about, crime. Well, what is crime? Who's defined as a criminal? The criminalization has largely been, it's been racialized, and it's been, it's along class lines. People who are criminal, what's considered criminal are the rich people get away with literal murder, and poor and Black and working class people get hung up on parking tickets, right?
Yeah, parking tickets are set up so that rich people can get away with doing whatever they want, and poor people can't do the same thing.
A fine is saying it's legal for rich people.
Yeah, you have a $200 parking ticket. For me, that would be fucking awful. For a millionaire, okay, I'll just write it off.
It's much more of a pain in the ass to actually have to pay it than to the amount that it is.
Right, and then there's this whole situation. And this is absolutely we have to look at go back to 2014 with the Ferguson riots.
Yeah.
Which is that there's all these related stories that you could read from about how cops would write you they would write working class Black people, they would write them $200 parking ticket. Well, they can't afford it, so what do? They go to payday loan, and they try to pay it off, and they get stuck in a debt trap, and it's just this whole absolutely brutal cycle of entrapment and poverty.
Yeah.
And it's not simply a matter of you need to make the police more humane. No, the whole point is that the whole legal system is set up to fuck over colonized people, Black people, brown people, poor people, etc.
Bringing it back to policing, so most of the time, police either go after suspects with relation to the possibility that they might have drugs, which drugs shouldn't be illegal. If someone's addicted to something, and it's negatively affecting their life, they should get help, not a jail term. But you have that. You have theft, which oftentimes involves poor people, and cops being called to chase down a poor person for something that likely is insured, and if not, it's not like it's something that most stores factor in.
Right.
And then you have murder, which isn't stopped by police. Police oftentimes commit murders, but I don't know I don't know the stats well enough to say oftentimes with comparison to other murders, but
too hung up on the specifics. We're talking about very broad.
Yeah, but police can't stop murder, and so you don't need policing for murder. At best, you need quality detective work at best, and that would also be a compromise, but I think it's something that I think a lot of people would want, just at the very least to try to prevent more murder from occurring, since most murders are done by people who know the murder.
That's the problem of the system, is that if I prevent a crime, there's no statistic for that, really.
Right, absolutely.
If I arrest you afterwards, that's statistics. I can sell that to the populace and get votes.
Absolutely.
I'm cleaning up the streets.
Right, and the big problem with all this to begin with is that we're talking about things that are consequences, things that are epiphenomenon, and instead of getting them to say that they're not of consequence. Of course, murder is terrible, drug epidemics are terrible, but where are they? Where do they come from? And this is why I, as a communist, I come in and I say, well, have you considered that the unemployment rate is 25% in some of these communities, sometimes higher. Sometimes the youth unemployment is as high as like 50 or 70%. Right? This is a problem of capitalism, which is something that people who are talking about these issues on this level of, we need more money for social services, less money for police. This is something that they miss entirely, because they're talking about systemic issues, but they're not actually bringing their attention to the system that undergirds all of it, which at its bottom is capitalism, and capitalism that's built on settler colonialism, right? It says all these things that are tied to greater historical developments, historical economic developments, and so on.
And this is,
and that these institutions that we're confronting today, institutions like the police, institutions like the legal system, which puts millions of people needlessly behind bars, and global wars that makes the United States is the prison house of nations. Right? This is some huge institutions that we're confronting today that are creating not only domestic problems, but massive geopolitical crises. Right? The United States has over 800 military bases in over 150 countries. These are not unrelated problems.
Yeah. And the thing that makes it especially difficult is most people have been taught capitalist propaganda, since childhood, and most economists are describe things based on how to continue capital growth in a country,
or how to manage capitalism more effectively.
Yeah, and that
have even ostensibly left-wing economists doing that. People like, Richard Wolff and I guess less to the left, people like Paul Krugman saying, oh, we need more social programs, or we need to spend less on the military or whatever. And like, granted, those are things that would be great, but they're just not politically feasible.
Well, so I mean, the other thing is, people aren't taught to break down things based off of the end goal, and for whatever reason I forgot the term, which I liked to use a bunch, but critical thinking. People aren't taught critical thinking, and and that also doesn't help. And when it comes to making change, it involves it always looks incredibly overwhelming.
But more to the point, critical thinking is not something that you just get taught once and then you know it forever. It's like, it's like brushing your teeth. You stop doing it for a while, your teeth are going to get nasty, right? And I would say kind of much like that, critical thinking is not something that you learn once and you're done.
Well, yeah, it's not instinctive, so you have to reapply it. Essentially you have to every once in a while step back and look at what your ethical goals, because ethics is also not taught in school, or ethics isn't taught much in high school, to my memory of things, if you break things down based off of an ethical goal, so I usually describe my ethics as negative utilitarianism. I want to reduce the suffering of people as much as possible.
The least amount of harm for the most amount of people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because I think that'll bring a lot of joy too, by the way. I'm not I think people think that removing suffering is always an intense and difficult job. And at the moment, because of the system that we have, it is to some degree, and you can only put so much effort. Otherwise, you start to get into harming yourself, and that doesn't help anybody either. So obviously people can only do so much, and with that overwhelming, I think so I get the impression that I have tended to think about things in terms of the March of Dimes type thing, of people at least doing a little to try to help
many
make
hands
stuff
make
better.
for light loads.
Whatever load they're comfortable with, because I don't think people can do everything, but I think that there are some who demoralize people by, oh, you're not doing enough, because some people can only do so much in terms of stuff, because otherwise they'll break down themselves, and
burnout.
Yeah, and burnout's a real thing. People need breaks from even activism. Christy at the moment is on a break, by the way. She will be back, just because I didn't mention to audiences, and I want to make that clear. It's just speaking out is important, at the very least, but I just think that more people need to understand and be on board with goals, because I fear that if some of the fundamental aspects don't get taught, people can dive down to other avenues of fascism, because there are aspects of fascism ingrained in society. And then you have, well, they're often called tankies.
Oh, I get called a tanky every day, at least once a day.
Oh, okay.
I'm a communist.
Yeah, but like, the thing is, here's the thing, like, I've heard a meme about it, just like, we should have never left. The worst thing that the left has done is give neoliberals the word tanky.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's such a diluted word, and I think that my biggest problem with what this word does is that it takes something like as milquetoast and straightforward as, I think the U.S. should not go to war with China. I think that would be very bad. Okay, you're a tanky now. Like that. Yeah, no, that's the logic behind it. That's the thing, is
not how that works. It's bad to go to it, like, I don't think wars are going to solve things. I don't think wars are going to stop the Chinese internment camps, and we need to fight against the ICE internment camps as well.
Right. You deal with the fascism. You deal with the oppression in your own goddamn country, especially when your country, and I would say your country, our country that we live in at least, is busy subjugating the whole goddamn world.
Yeah.
I think that this is why I think that whole conversation is such a distraction, is that not only is the whole thing kind of manufactured by the State Department and the geopolitical apparatuses of the American government to begin with, but even with that aside, we've got fascistic police forces here on the ground. We have the Department of Homeland Security, disappearing people. Michael Reinhold was assassinated by the DHS, and nobody talks about that. He was assassinated.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, we've got the Border Patrol, and what are they called?
The IC. The IC are
Customs and Border Enforcement. Yeah, Customs and Border Protection.
Oh,
so, yeah. They're participating in genocidal programs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally, they were doing radical hysterectomies.
Yeah, the IC
on people to limit their population.
Yep.
Right. The whole thing.
I mean, that was the express program. That was what they said they were doing on paper.
Ethnic cleansing project to begin with.
Yes. Yeah. But no. Absolutely. Definitely.
And this is why.
On paper, though, they were willing to write it out and say that that's what they were doing. That was their program.
Right, and so here's
and Biden hasn't pushed back against it at all. Hasn't. Really.
No, and in fact, he was a core part of expanding its powers under the Obama-Biden administration back between 2008 and 2016.
Okay. Now, people, you can make a case that that China is further along with the Uyghurs and their genocidal program, that they're further into it. They've gotten further with it. But you can't argue that it's different in kind, because this is a genocidal program we've been participating in.
But more to the point, we don't know how much of that is manufactured State Department bullshit, and even more to the point, it's none of our goddamn business, because it doesn't matter what other countries may or may not be doing to their domestic populations, because that is a fundamental distraction. It's saying, look over here, don't think about the oppression happening on the home front. Look, the evil bad stuff is happening over there in those dirty brown countries. They're barbarians, they're Easterners, right? That's just the whole Orientalism thing. fundamentally it's a distraction from both the oppression happening within our borders, within America's immediate purview, and for America to go around invading countries willy-nilly, as it did back in 2003 when the State Department said, "Oh, look at this! Saddam Hussein has WMDs and he's slaughtering his own people." Right? Same thing back in 2011 with Obama in Syria. Right? Assad is using chemical weapons. Oh wait, well that was bullshit. This whole thing was bullshit. And I think it's very important to just understand that our ability to understand and interpret what's going on in other countries is incredibly limited, and we should be at minimum very skeptical of the kind of information that we can understand and interpret about the people, the nations that America considers geopolitical rivals, China most of all, which is why I think this discourse is incredibly dangerous.
Not going to get a lot of pushback from me. I think we were talking the same language.
You're going to get millions of pushback from me. No, I don't.
I'll get a lot of pushback from people who immediately will jump on that and say, "Oh, you're denying genocide." And I go, "No, I'm not. I'm saying, look at the genocide right here in your own fucking house."
Yeah, and well, yeah, and that's kind of how that's kind of was the argument to try to promote Trump as being pro LGBT plus issues, because they said that he was helping them over there because LGBT people get killed in other countries, and that he was quote unquote advocating to stop that while trying to make it so if you're trans you need special identification to show that you're trans in if you're a government employee, or a bunch of
nothing
anti-trans,
serious.
right?
Not like he was asking for tattoos. He just wanted you to sew a T on your clothing, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't mean that Biden has stopped doing actual oppression and horrible things. It's just a lot of I guess so. Teaching can be done, making arguments to fight back against the general oppression. I don't know if you agree with this at all, because I don't. I looked up and I'm not sure all the details of the power the police sheriff has to alter the police force, but oftentimes you end up with former police officers being elected as sheriff, which shouldn't be a thing ever, because they're never going to make change ever. If they're a former police officer,
we've investigated ourselves and we have found that we have done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And it's usually the role of the police department, the sheriff's department, is to police the police.
Right. Yeah, and if you have something, like an internal, like an IA, an internal affairs sort of thing, it's still, it's really more of a PR operation than actual. Like, occasionally they might, out some corrupt figure and say, "Oh, see, this person was, dipping into the public money to, spit polish their Lamborghini or whatever." But like, for the most part, they're not gonna make any meaningful structural, changes to the police. The purpose is primarily to be, good public relations.
Yeah, police department. We had a police department dip into the public funds to buy a margarita machine.
oh, for fuck's sake, and like, I'm sure their IA didn't catch that.
Yeah, no, it's it's kind of cringe, and even right now, the Derek Chauvin's trial is still going on, and I don't expect anything to
Was he the guy responsible for George Floyd?
Yes.
I had trouble with the names.
Yeah.
Okay.
He is the one who killed George Floyd. It's annoying that it's rare for police involved killings to lead to criminal trial or conviction.
Right. And in the event that it does, it's less a matter of justice and more a matter of, we know that there's going to be huge fucking riots if we don't.
Well, yeah, but
until there was right, they were the program. They were following the program of doing nothing. He was on a administrative paid leave.
Yeah,
is what they put him on, and until there were riots.
Right, and I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that the fact that there was such a visceral and not just immediate, like obviously, they burned down the precinct, right? Like there was this immediate local response, but the fact that this case has received global attention, it is of major consequence to the way that the legal system is actually going to deal with it, right? I think people are prone to maybe approaching this in strictly kind of legalistic terms, like, oh, the court can do this and that and the other thing, and the lawyers are gonna pursue this line of attack in court. I think that's all well and good for the domain that it works in. However, I think that it underestimates kind of the greater political impact that this case has had on the both the domestic political environment and the international political environment, right? Like that, if they're going to be in even bigger trouble if they don't serve up this guy's head on a platter. And that is thanks, and I would say that is thanks to both the local militant response and the global response.
Well, yeah, and that's kind
also,
of...
I'm going to need to leave in the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay. Well, if that's the case, feel free to promote yourself. Where can people find you?
Sure. So I would really love it if folks subscribed to my YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/c/aworld2win, all one word. And if you would like to help support me financially, you can head over to patreon.com/aworld2win, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month. And if you'd like to make a one-time donation to me, my Cash App is $Lenin lives, LENIN lives. And my Venmo is also at World to Win and the number 1. So if you want to help me out financially, those are great ways to do that. If you don't have money to support me, that's fine too. Just find me on Twitter. My handle is the same as my Venmo. It's at A World to Win 1.
Yeah, and you should be able to find those all down below. Also, is there something you're working on that you want to promote?
Yeah, I'm currently I'm working. I wrote an essay about. Actually, it was about this very topic. It's about the essay's title is "The End of Neoliberalism," with a little question mark at the end, where I kind of talk about a lot of these historical developments in the last 40 years or so, So it was originally a paper that I wrote. It was actually my entrance essay for grad school, but I'm turning it into a video script. So I'll have a video out probably, I don't know, let's say the next month or so. Just out of guess. If that's the kind of thing that interests you, I talk about policing. I talk about fascism. I talk about liberalism. I talk about recuperation and talk about all the things that we talked about today, just a little bit more academic format.
Yeah, and I'm sure more in depth.
I try to keep things as accessible as I can, but folks were curious, so
yeah. And yeah, obviously you can stay on till you have to leave. Like,
yeah,
we're not kicking you out or anything. I just wanted to make sure you'd have enough time to
thanks for letting me plug. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's. I mean, this is the thing that Sophia has brought up a bunch, and this is the thing I kind of agree to, and that there needs to actually be there doesn't need to be violence, but there does need to be a threat of violence to force the hand of people who are making policies, because at the moment there's a bunch of rich people in power in very the Democratic Party is very halvesies and goes politically with, when it comes to social politics, with whatever they think is going to be the most popular. I mean, there's a reason Obama wasn't for gay marriage until his second term. Really,
right? They're very opportunistic about it. They only jump on those social issues once it becomes too costly not to, right? Because the queer liberation movement goes all the way back to the 1970s, right? But they didn't even superficially embrace LGBT issues until probably 2010.
Yeah, and also I take back whatever previous statement I said about detective things. Yeah, those obviously need to go, because I just because my brain was back on the Derek Chauvin trial, and the department's top homicide detective testified that kneeling on Floyd's neck after he had been handcuffed was, quote unquote, totally necessary.
That's fucking disgusting.
Yeah, no, that's horrible and absolutely wrong in every sense of the word. And if you think that's right, you should be fired out of a cannon into the sun.
If that's totally necessary, why is it a violation of department policy?
Why is it a human rights violation in just about every aspect? That is problematic on so many levels, because you know what happens when you're handcuffed? You can't throw a punch. You can't really do much but squirm. Putting your knee on his neck, on the neck of anyone who's handcuffed, is absolutely not necessary.
Putting your knee on somebody's neck, handcuffed or not, is completely unnecessary.
That's also true.
Anyway, I'm gonna depart now.
Okay.
I really appreciate y'all having me on.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure
thank
meeting
you for
you.
coming on.
Yeah, happy to be here. Take care, folks.
You too.
Peace.
So, still, fuck Derek Chauvin and the police department supporting him. Holy shit.
Oh, yeah. I can't blame the police department in supporting him in that way. In some way. I'm not sure the way that they're doing it is good, if you understand. But I think that there should be a certain amount of not unquestioning or unwavering support. I'm not saying if you've, been busy burning down the town that they need to support you, but there needs to be a certain amount of rigid support that a police officer can expect.
Oh, fuck. I read that wrong. Shit. I said misinformation.
Which misinformation?
I read unnecessary is necessary. Now I just feel embarrassed.
Oh, okay. Unnecessary as necessary. It's totally unnecessary. Oh, yeah. Perfect. Good. Excellent.
Yeah, no,
excellent.
That's actually good. God damn it.
Okay. Good. Well, good for the correction. Because I was going, that's just crazy.
I feel like I need to message Melody back just to make sure.
That's good, but I mean,
well, just to not
make sure that you get this
way.
information. Yeah.
Try to end disinformation if I can. But yeah.
But the thing is that yes, the whole George Floyd trial thing, I've been catching pieces of it. It's distressing to me whenever I catch anything from it on the just that it is so twistedly sick. And once again, I don't hear people discussing it, but one of my huge problems is he thought that butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. He was content to kill a man on camera, and he was confident that that would not even affect his pension. Because you don't kill someone on camera unless you're confident that you're not going to do time for it. I mean,
the person who pushed over a man needing a cane and seriously injured him didn't get in any trouble.
Okay, but that happened fast. They go, I didn't realize anybody was filming it. There's a lot of things, I didn't think about the idea that this guy knew he was being filmed.
Yeah.
Had time to think about it and consider it. And was going, no, that's okay. That's the part that really I just go, that says there's something absolutely systemically wrong in that police department. And maybe in a lot of police departments, but definitely in that one.
Like I said, the St. Paul police were perfectly fine firing tear gas into onto the sidewalk just a few blocks from where I live. Like, it's definitely like as bad as the the Minneapolis police's problems are worse than the St. Paul police's problems, but there's just throughout the country, just about every police station has a ton of problems, and also is most of the things that the police are called for and the police have to do are just don't make sense with the sort of training they get, because they get training in how to kill people.
Yes. They get training in how to kill people, and then they're called in for all kinds of things, including animal control, where, things keep getting pushed onto their plate, which is part of the defund the police.
Yeah.
Is that things get pushed onto their plate that don't belong there, and then they're supposed to be handling it, and it gets crazy.
Yeah. This person is committing suicide. The person calls 911. That person gets shot and killed. And you're just like, well, what? You're supposed to do the opposite of that, police. That's, but, like, also just policing in general, it's just, I don't see the point of, policing. Admittedly, we did just go over a lot of that much better, but
the idea of policing is that when there are people hanging out on a street corner, the police are supposed to come by and say, hey, move along. You're going to get in trouble. I know you're going to get in trouble. You know you're going to get in trouble. No point in going down that road.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, those are always like the good cases are when people might actually cause trouble, but more often than not, it's just like teenagers who happen to be hanging around near a mall, and then the police get called, and they get into a bunch of trouble for hanging out in the wrong spot.
Yeah, and the bunch of trouble is not supposed to happen. They're supposed to say, "Move along." And I've stopped by. I've taken notice of you. I know what you look like, and I know where half of you live. So don't start trouble. Just move along. And that's basically all that's supposed to happen out of that.
Well, yeah, here's the thing:
you get nothing for that, unless he asks them their name and takes it down and fills out a thing saying that he's encountered these people at this place at this time. Okay, but it doesn't go into the crime statistics.
Yeah, but I mean, also, like, everything you just mentioned, you don't need a police officer for. You just need a social worker who's willing to come, especially one who's like well versed in the.
Well, that's most of what policing is about. That's policing. That specifically is what's known as policing. That's policing an area. That's what they're doing. That's what the police are supposed to be doing.
Yeah, well, it's not. The police department hasn't been doing that so much as.
And you see, when you say my house is being robbed, that would also fall under the police department policing. When you say my house has been robbed, that's crime investigation. That's a not policing thing. That's another end.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the same end. And I'm like, that's really cool. It's a very good point. And dividing those, I'm not sure there's a real problem with that. They have to liaison, but other than that.
I mean, do they even have to liaison? Like, what exactly would be the liaison between, like, someone who's just telling some teenagers to
like I said, the crime
loitering
I am
here
being robbed. My house is being burgled.
Oh, yeah.
And they show up. I think have to not stomp on the evidence. There's certain things that are about the prosecution and so on of this that it's important that their behaviors are constrained regarding, and that kind of thing. But the moving the kids along, there's nothing in there that goes with the crime, and except that they should be taking notes and they should say, I saw these people and recognized 3 of them. These are the 3 I recognized. And those are in their notes. And if that way, when somebody has got some master criminal investigation that involves children standing on street corners, they can consult notes.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, that just, I don't know, that seems weirder and weirder to me the more I think about it, and that doesn't, like, that just seems like trying to make sure where everyone is or something. I don't know. It's just weird. Like, I don't see the point in, like, half of that. I mean, like, I get the point of, like, calling people if your house is being robbed or whatnot. I get calling the police, but the police would have to not be trained. The police would have to be trained completely differently from how they are now. And at that point, you might as well get rid of the police department as a whole and replace it. With
how it's trained now is crazy, because I see you've given them 2 different goals, and one has no. If I tell you your job is to make the area more peaceful, more peaceable, more livable, and to maintain the order. Well, how do I come back and show, as a politician, that we are maintaining the order? It's much more maintained than it was under the last administration. This doesn't make it, I don't have a quantifiable number. It's 50% more maintained. What does that mean? Okay, but as well as their goal is then to be preventing crime. And the other side of their goal is to prosecute crimes. You need crimes to happen if you're going to prosecute them. And you need to not arrest criminals that it would be a good idea to arrest them in terms of policing, but it's a bad idea to arrest them in terms of prosecutions. Because it won't be a successful prosecution on that regard. So I don't ever want to deal with them. I don't want to take their name or have anything to do with them until I'm ready to prosecute them successfully. This doesn't make it, that you've given them two separate goals that are antithetical to each other.
Well, yeah, and only trained them how to kill people. So, like, or largely trained them just how to kill people, and that.
Well,
that
yeah. How close to the center of the target you can get your shots? I can measure that, and I can sell that. I can measure it, and then I can say, "Look, our policemen are more accurate than they were under the last administration."
Our police officers have nice, shiny, tank-like vehicles, which is totally necessary. And
for breaking in the front doors of those buildings, you see? Yes.
And robotic dogs, which they're experimenting for police currently.
Yes.
Which is its own problem. Potentially, because that's more about controlling the people and less about controlling the people through physical force than anything else. It's just adding little bits of militaristic tech to do whatever the police want with it, with no consequences, unless they get spoken out against, and unless you can have massive riots, and even then it's a gamble in whether or not the police officer will be prosecuted. So it's just, there's a lot that needs to be rooted out of the system as it is. There is so much that just feels overwhelming and almost impossible when most of the politicians will continue the system as is, and it will largely continue the system as is, and it's just.
An animal behaviorist and statistician, two disciplines you don't often find together, was examining the dogs, police dogs.
Yeah.
And after tallying up what you can do with getting to false signal and that kind of thing, what his point was after you've done that and do a statistical analysis, that literally you are better off flipping a coin.
Yeah.
Is there drugs in the car? Flip a coin. Heads. There's drug. We've decided there's drugs in the car and we can search it. Tails, we're not, and that you could not possibly sell that in a court. The officer flipped a coin. It came up heads. It was fair.
Yeah.
That's a strong indication. It's not a good. There's no way that sells in court, and yet we accept them in court.
Yeah, and look, not even so. Even though there's the nice phrase "all cops are bastards," we at least know not all police dogs are bastards, because I believe one was being abused by a police officer and bit him in the ass.
There's a film of it's incredible, and I do not recommend watching it. It is horrifically barbaric. The abuse he does to the dog. I'm not going to even describe it.
Yeah.
He body slams the dog against the frame of the back entryway to a car.
Yeah.
As in, just jams his body, which is like north of 200 pounds, against the dog's body, against that door jam, while throttling the dog by its collar, hanging the dog by its collar, and body slams.
Yeah, and that is the thing is, if you have a job opening that lets you get away with killing people, you get a lot of people wanting that job opportunity who are fine causing significant amounts of harm, and some of which enjoy killing people. I know there was that there's like that police training person who was talking about like the first time you kill someone, it'll be greater than sex or something. Essentially, it's like we have so many police problems, and I don't think it's going to there just needs to be ways to people need to get elected into small parts of offices and get build up from there.
I know of a police officer who said that he was talking with someone, and they said that who was not a police officer, and they said, you realize that you in talking with you entirely view the whole world as being perps and people, and that perps aren't people, and that the world divides into those two things. And he said it took a while for that to really, he worked on it, and that was true, and he had to quit being a police officer.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, a lot of the good cops either get fired, killed, or quit the police force, and that's not a good thing. That's a problem.
Yeah, well, I just view it as being, maybe there should be some sort of a way of going into social services for a while, and maybe talking with a psychiatrist and readjusting it. Not seeing the world that way. That he had come to see the world and he couldn't stop seeing the world that way, and he went, I can't be a police officer anymore. I see the whole world as being perps and people, and that I don't think that perps are people. They're not people anymore to me, and that's not right. I can't do that.
Yeah.
So I'm saying there are good cops, but sometimes, they're going to fall by the wayside.
Well, there are plenty of good cops who have spoken out against things and gotten immediately fired. Killing someone isn't something to get you immediately fired as a police officer. Murdering a black person isn't going to get you fired as a police officer. But speaking out against the police department is something that will get you fired as a police officer, and that is worlds of fucked up. And that's why there needs to be extreme change.
And now we try and tie it all back to liberalism.
Yeah.
Or the view of liberalism. I mean, there's a view of liberalism, which is what the liberal agenda. I don't think there. I still don't think there really is. There's sort of a liberal agenda.
Well, there's more of a neoliberal agenda because that relates to policies, whereas liberalism is more of a philosophical.
I think that's a good
idea.
That was a good point that emerged in the conversation here. When you say we're going to be doing this about policies, that's neoliberalism. That's the new liberalism.
Yeah, and oftentimes it's policies to, like was said, was take a little bit to make people feel better and not act on any of it, or not act on much. Oftentimes just like one good thing that people can pat you on the back for, and then well, Biden's a good example. Like it's good that what he's doing, like in my opinion, it's still good what he's doing for rights for being trans, but like he is still allowing the ICE to do what they do. He's still bombing countries for no good reason. He's
the problem is that the mobilization to change the ICE overnight would be seen as a militaristic takeover. I mean, that's really what you'd have to do. You'd have to say, look, we're just going to be turning a lot of this over to the military. We're going to be changing how it's done. We're going to be having to rent a whole crap load of hotels. It is going to cost a fortune, but we're just going to be doing this shit in order to get out, because we have no facilities built. We don't have the things. We don't have the manpower necessary to even decide what kind of facilities we need at this point. We are so far out of it and behind on this that we're just trying to build up to where we can actually address the problem.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you can't. The big problem is, like, you can't just tiptoe to solve a problem that's been escalating since like 2009. The Department of Homeland Security released a report of human rights violations in the ICE during the Obama administration, and it's gotten worse under the Trump administration. Got way worse over on the Trump administration, but it was still, the ICE has almost always been committing human rights violations, feeding people rotten food, keeping them in far too isolated chambers, effectively torturing people because they wanted to live in this country too much. And for one, it's against American values, and also it's just people say,
I think human rights violations are against American values in general. We don't need to go a whole lot further into it there.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, it's oftentimes excused by, these people aren't.
It's too expensive
real
not
Americans. These people aren't real Americans, so it's fine. They're illegal aliens, and I mean, that doesn't justify torturing them, for one, but also it's obviously, because of the ICE is arrest first, look into whether or not we should have arrested you later. That's why you have American citizens who have been put in ICE camps. Like, this has already been a consistent thing. I know someone was in there for like years because he didn't want to get deported because he was an American citizen. Like, why the fuck would you want to be deported to a strange country?
Yeah.
And
yeah, well, they've always been. It has been a problem. I'm not saying it hasn't been a problem. It's been a growing problem, but it's human rights violations. Yes, I think I think Biden could get a lot of traction politically, and selling it politically on it's human rights violations. Yes, we are going to bend every effort. That's not what we do.
Yeah, I mean, that would be nice. Unfortunately, I don't know that I am not personally. I don't think he's going to do it unless the protests against the ICE escalate.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that if he was just taking the attitude of, yes, it's going to cost a fortune, it's going to cost a whole lot of money, we're going to have to cut back on the military budget, then yeah, I'm willing to declare a state of emergency over this one. We don't do human rights violations. We need to alter this until we are no longer doing human rights violations. It's that simple.
Well, yeah, but human rights violations are so fun. It's the American way. I mean, if we were we've been doing human rights violations for a long time. Giving
it's a tradition now. I mean,
yeah, giving smallpox to Native Americans here in the United States. Trying to genocide Native Americans. There's a lot against Native Americans here in the United States. A lot of human rights violations, Trail of Tears, all that sort of stuff. And it's just, it's a tradition. I mean, right from the very beginning with Christopher Columbus.
Yeah. He didn't do any atrocities on these shores.
Yeah, no, I mean, his atrocities were largely in islands near United States. That's fair. But it's getting near to closing
we should
time.
be doing,
Perfect. Where can people find you?
Right here.
You're not in the Rumpus Room anymore?
No, still doing the Rumpus Room. And I do this. These are my major social media outlets. I also, on Discord, I'm a server slut. I roam around a bit, but generally, if you ping me, I will notice and come if I'm on Discord at all.
Yeah. And as for me, you can find me at Ozma in the Dark just about everywhere. OzmaInTheDark.com is my website, largely showcasing whatever most recent episode of the Fluid Voice is, and my Twitch channel, which I haven't used for a bit, but I do plan on getting back on as soon as I sort out job and housing related stuff. And outside that, you can find me every Sunday here in the Fluid Voice, every Wednesday, and sometime during the week, oftentimes Tuesday, there's I manufacture a clip of an episode, whatever part I found the most entertaining to manufacture a clip of. And everyone here. I'm missing one. God damn it! Your voice matters. Your mind matters.
Life.
Your life matters. That's it. Sorry, life is such a abstract concept for me. It causes me to miss it, because your life does matter, and you matter, and never give up being you. And with that, bye.
Peace.